Hi, everyone. How many of you right now would take a thumb drive from me and plug it into your computers? YOLO, right?
Got an honest face.
So fortunately, I am not a red teamer. I am focused on blue team defense. I work for Verizon, formerly known as Risk. We're a digital forensics incident response consulting firm, much like Mandiant or Straws or CrowdStrike or you name them. That's my intro. So I found that's a default animation in Keynote, by the way. I just found that today. I was like, ooh, that's perfect. So the agenda for today, I'm going to go over a couple of things real quick on significance, things that we as Verizon see and mirrors cases that I've seen in my consulting work with customers with malicious USB devices. They are out there, as Joe indicated, and as apparently the last talk went on. I didn't get a chance to see that one. So I'll go over one of the scenarios. Normally, I've given this in a few other places, and it's normally about an hour talk. So I gotta push through on this and make sure. But I'll be outside if you want to talk about anything else, definitely. So DHS study back in 2011, they dropped a bunch of thumb drives out in the parking lots. Yeah, you can see there, 60% of them got plugged in. And the ones with logos on them, I think they indicated that they were government logos of some sort, so very trustworthy face, right? 90% of those got plugged in. Kind of a bad statistic. Any red teamers in here? You're taking notes, right? Put government logos on your USB sticks. Okay. So 5 years later, you'd think it'd get better? It did. Come on. Give us some credit. 48% got plugged in. There's actually a great blog on this from some of the guys that did the study. There's a link in the link down here at the bottom. Joe, are you guys sharing slides through the conference somewhere? I'm happy to give a PDF with the slides. There's a bunch of links and stuff in here, so I'll figure out some way to get that out. Some of those thumb drives went in within minutes, as in like first thing as they're getting in the door, right? Forget that email that's been waiting all weekend long. I got to find out what's on this thumb drive because there could be something good. I might need to tweet about it. You guys all know Stuxnet, right? Okay, so USB was used in there. It wasn't a USB exploit, so to say, but there was a link file exploit in there that exploited how Microsoft Windows interprets the icons as they're referenced. You can execute code by way of referencing an export through a DLL that's included on your thumb drive. That's been patched since. There was another one that was similar after that, but that was conducted through a USB medium because they were trying to get into that air gap network. So we've got nation states using this, and we've got studies showing that it's effective. We've got, can't say if they're nation states always, but we've got other attackers using them as well. So the scenarios, well, first off, the significance. I'm Verizon, right? The DBIR report, I'd get fired if I didn't at least mention it. So this is one of the stats that we have in there. This is the targets of compromises, targets of the breaches, credentials, right? So I categorize USB attacks like this as phishing attacks. Same category. You can put them in emails, or you can put them on a thumb drive. You're convincing someone to run or open or something that piece of something that will get something running on your computer. So credentials are the major source. Can you get credentials with a USB drive? Yeah, absolutely. So here's a scenario. You can read more about this. This is another Verizon publication called the Data Breach Digest that talks more in depth about some of the cases that we actually work rather than the DBIR, which is more anonymized from lots of people. In short here, because I'm a little shorter on time, a janitor at a company was offered money to plug USB drives into computers while going about everyday business. And it was effective. So the way this was a case that I didn't personally work, but Verizon handled the case for a customer. The way they detected this is the administrator logged on to one of the infected machines and noticed an extra command prompt. You know, the login scripts that you do when your domain policies and all that kind of stuff. He noticed an extra one, right? How observant is that? So that's how they caught that. This scenario was an entertainment industry company, which is a lot more elaborate of a setup here. They were at a conference. They targeted an executive for the company. They had a booth. They talked to the executive. They followed up with the executive with letterhead, sent him a thumb drive, plugged in, and got a interpreter shell back out. And the quote down here, once the reverse shell had been established, it didn't take long for the threat actor to start exfiltrating gigabytes of data, including an unreleased movie. It's a very serious threat. That's what I'm trying to convey across. Have I been successful? Okay. So those of you that raised your hand, would you take a thumb drive from me now? Yes. It's only a 512 meg though. No? All right. So the attacks that can be conducted with a USB. There's the very simple and most likely the most known to you guys right now is what I call file-based or logical attacks. And those are what we do commonly see in phishing emails via PDF files, via Office documents, or via the link file exploits or some other 0 day or 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 day, whatever it is at the time, that is not patched up on that system. So the PDF files, they run scripts, they allow for event triggering, all kinds of crazy things, just like the Office documents. They can do all kinds of nasty stuff for some weird reason. You know, they think that's a good idea. But anyways, we're all very familiar with those through the phishing emails. So I don't want to concentrate too much on that because those are fairly easy to address. You throw them in a sandbox, throw them at antivirus, throw them into your PDF or your Word or whatever analyzers. You can inspect those pretty well. What I find most people don't have a real grasp on is the hardware attacks that can be conducted with USB. Some of you are probably familiar. Some devices out there. Anyone? The names? Rubber Ducky is like the #1 most well-known device. It was one of the earlier devices. Another one? Bash Bunny. I heard some more. USB Armory. Raspberry Pi. They have a Zero. Raspberry Pi Zero it's called. So all can be used to conduct USB-based attacks. Did they talk about some of those in the last talk, those of you who are there? Some of those devices? Not so much? Other USB stuff? Okay. What's that? The face dancer? Okay, I'm not familiar with that one. Gotcha. Okay, I'll have to check that out then. The physical attacks that can be conducted pretty easily by these tools, some of the ones that were mentioned here, and by many others that have been custom designed. A USB device a thumb drive looking thing can emulate a keyboard. And what's scary about that is what you think about how do you run your highly privileged scripts? How do you run your highly privileged programs and all those sorts of things? You type in, right? You type or you use the mouse. That's your interface. That's the human interface into your computer. So if a USB device can take the form of your keyboard and your mouse, and it can be scripted, that's pretty serious, right? It now has taken over the same privileges, the same permissions that you have as your user, the fingers that you're typing with. It can do anything that you're doing. So you're logged into your domain admin account. It's got the world, right? It's a very, very serious threat. And the thing that makes it worse, there is no admin privileges required to enable these things. When's the last time you plugged in an external keyboard or plugged in an external mouse and it said, hey, are you sure you want to use this device? Yeah, never, right? None of the OSs, unless anyone use was it Cubes? Yeah. Does it? I think it does that, doesn't it?
It has a USB VM now.
Yeah. I remember seeing Joanna talk something about that. I haven't played much with that, but a little better. Okay, cool. So Cubes, check that out. It's like a virtualizing app type of operating system, Linux-ish based type of thing. Helps to protect against these things. The CD-ROM is a serious threat in this because Windows back in XP timeframe allowed for what we call auto run. Yeah, you all remember that. Some of the viruses spread through that. Some of the virus spreading things using USB did that way. They blocked it. I believe it happened in XP at one of the patch levels that they blocked the auto run. It turned it off by default. As of Vista, you can't actually turn that on for USB storage, right? Mass storage. So disk drives and thumb drives that you plug in. CD-ROMs, however, still have auto run available. So you can turn those on. And USB devices can emulate CD-ROMs. I think it was SanDisk that made the U3 USB devices. Those are all run on CD-ROM type of things. So if you can get a little menu thing with portable apps loaded, you think you could get something else loaded? Oh yeah, anything you want. And then the last one is a little more recent development in the last year, so it's been developed a little bit more. Started by Mubix, making that real popular. He inserted through one of those USB devices an Ethernet adapter. It sounds silly, it sounds innocuous, right? If you plug in an Ethernet adapter, but you don't have a cable going to it, what could it do? What's the worst that can happen? So one of the things that Mubix made popular is he found that if you plug in an Ethernet adapter with a ridiculously high speed rate as the operating system sees it, and then you emulate that it's actually plugged in, it's not going anywhere, right? It's a virtual adapter, it doesn't even matter. The operating sees that super high speed rate as the priority device, regardless of routing tables. So when you go and authenticate all of your things, it loops through that emulated USB Ethernet device, and then that device sends it back out to the real network, so you know nothing different. So when's the last time you got prompted for that USB Ethernet device that you plugged in? Are you sure you want to use this? Never, right? I'm hoping that changes in Windows or something, but anyways. What I'm presenting to you is a methodology. If you have a piece of hardware in your hand that you feel might be malicious, I've got a methodology that we use in our labs to assess these devices to make sure we're not plugging volatile and malicious items into our sacred systems. Right? If you take some thumb drive that comes to you, if you're in a forensics role and you take that and plug it into your forensics machine, you are exposing your forensics machine to the malicious threat if you don't do the right things. You are doing that now if you are plugging things in now. So what I want you to get out of this is a comfort level that if someone hands you a USB device and you don't know that person or you don't know that device, you can walk away and say, big deal. I'll run through this methodology and I'll know, is it malicious or is it not? And I'll know that in the process of doing that, I haven't compromised anything on my systems. So it's a little bit of a lengthy process and it requires some setup, but you can't be too safe, right? So the first step, we want to preserve anything that was on that disk. If these devices can be scripted, they can be scripted to go and wipe data. So what I want to do first is prevent the scripts from actually running. I want to collect the data as much as I can off of the data portion of that device. So you need a physical machine. I run a Mac. You can't really see it. It's behind the podium here. I use Fusion. I don't have any problems with it. I always use Fusion for Windows. I don't even boot into Boot Camp. I don't ever have to do that. This is one thing, I don't use my Mac for this, but throwaway laptop. You need a physical machine. Use a Linux boot CD to make it easy. I use Linux just because it's quick and easy to get the data off. You don't have to worry about booting Windows and all that kind of stuff. We're going to use a hardware write blocker. This is an example of a hardware write blocker right here. It's an inline write blocker. It uses power from the host computer, and it powers up the device, and it just prevents writes from going there. That's the whole forensic methodology. I recommend, though, you get something like the Tableau write blocker, because it's got its own power source. You guys heard of that USB thing that has the capacitors in it that can suck up juice, and then whammo, it goes and fries your computer? Well, if you haven't, you have now. So you don't want to plug that into your $10,000 forensics system now. Plug that into your Tableau and let that be a fuse. Replace your $200 write blocker rather than your $10,000 forensics machine. So then your standard collection of whatever tool you use to do that. Next step, physical machine again. This time we want to run the maliciousness. We want to find out what it's trying to do. So the biggest target is Windows, so that's what we use, and my recommendations on here are in the commas afterwards. Use a small hard drive, because the goal is you're going to acquire this drive actually twice. So get yourself a little 64 gig solid state, something like that. Make it fast, make it small, and then forensic wipe it out first, because that compresses a whole lot better. Lessons learned through the process. Use a software write blocker this time. The reason why, the Tableau hardware or any of the hardware write blockers are meant to talk USB mass storage. They don't know how to talk HID, the human interface. They don't know how to talk CD-ROMs. They don't know how to talk USB Ethernet. They don't know how to talk any of that. They are purely designed for USB mass storage and only to allow reads. So it shelters all of that other potential maliciousness out. You just get the logical data. Here, we want it. So I want a software write blocker. You can use that registry hack that's out there. Just Google that, registry hack USB write blocker, something like that. You'll find it. Ncase has a write blocker built into it. If you have that, it doesn't require a dongle, so you can use that without the dongle. We want the stuff to run, but we still use a write blocker because, forensics and stuff. Collect a before image of your disk and your RAM, and then prep any of your collection tools. This is kind of like malware sandboxing, but you're doing it on an actual hardware system. So if you've got any scripts or frameworks or anything like that you like to use for doing malware sandboxing, put them all on. And then the other thing I'm going to present to you along with this methodology is number 6, a PowerShell script that is going to make assessing the hardware maliciousness of these devices incredibly easy. Once you start up all that stuff, insert your USB, let it recognize the drivers, run through all that, give it a minute, 2 minutes, something along those lines, and then stop the PowerShell script, finish your volatile collection tools, and then do another hard drive collection and your memory collection, because you're going to do a differential of the clean versus the dirty, and of the disk and of the memory. And then from there, you're just going to do your standard find evil with your the file contents of your the acquisition from the disk. Look for any of the files in there. Run it through your AV scans. It's a low effort to result ratio, right? You can click a button or something like that. 5 minutes to kick off an AV scan. Let it go in the background. It doesn't cost you any more time. You surprised to hear a consultant say that? We don't bill for machine time, so it makes the job cheap. If that doesn't come up with anything, then you can run through IOC searches or then dig into your PDF or Office document specific tools to analyze the maliciousness of those files. If you don't find anything there, get into the disk of your sacrificial system. Look at the disk images, compare them, compare the memory images, compare your volatile tools, see what might have gotten started for processes, what files got created, what registry entries, all that standard stuff when you're looking for evil on a system. And also review the output from the PowerShell. The last thing here, collect firmware. This is the really super deep that I'm not very good at myself, but I have people for that. And probably the guys that were talking before me are one of those people, not my people, but they're probably the type of people you want to make friends with if you need to start doing this type of thing. There are thumb drive controllers, the USB controllers out there. The most well-known is Phison, Phison. There was a talk about this at ShmooCon in 2015 about how you can reprogramming these controllers in the field to become CD-ROMs, to become HIDs, and then you can rewrite the firmware on there to include scripts. And in fact, there's actually a tool now that'll take the rubber ducky scripts and compile them into firmware that can get loaded onto a Phison controller thumb drive. That costs like $5 on Amazon. The challenge is just finding one of those that has the Phison. It's not used across the board, so you might have to buy a few dozen and hope for one of them being it. So if you can't find bad in anything else and you're still convinced that there's a problem on this thing, then you can go after the firmware. The easiest way to do this is a program there called Chip Easy. Be very careful where you get this from. I've got a slide in a few that gives you the URL. Don't get it from anywhere else. It's a sketchy looking URL, I'll give you that, the one that I'm going to show you, but there's worse. So the Chip Easy, I've got a picture of it too. It tells you the controller that's on there. It tells you the size. It tells you all kinds of good stuff about that. It gives you URLs to the tools that will allow you to dump the firmware out there for analysis. And then the easiest part, number 4, just RE the firmware. Okay, so before I get into the PowerShell, some of the PDF file tools that you can use if you're not familiar with analyzing PDF files. Didier Stevens actually has quite a few blog posts on it. He's got a lot of information on all of that. So it's a great site to use. My favorite is this PPDF. I always have trouble saying this. PPDF, whatever. PP? Okay. Now on video saying that. So that's my favorite. He does a lot of cool stuff in that. There's an interactive shell. It's a real fun one to work with. For Office files, my favorite, again, up here is the Desolage Olay tools. He was on Bitbucket before, but he's modernized and now on GitHub. Any Bitbucket fans in here? No? Didier, again, has some tools down here that will allow you to dump some of those things out. This talk isn't on that. I don't have enough time for that. But those are really good tools to use. So here's a picture of the Chip Easy. Only get Chip Easy from that site. I told you it looks sketchy, right? .cc. Where is that from? China. Yeah, it looks sketchy as all hell. But that's actually the legit site. You'll find a ton of downloads offered from .rus and who knows what. So yeah, only get it from there. But you can see here some of the stuff. And for example, right here. So it tells you the Phison controller. Can everyone see that in the back? Is that big enough? This program was actually designed because there are people that will get thumb drives and reprogram the firmware to, let's say it's physically a 1 gig thumb drive. They'll go and reprogram it to represent a 64 gig, and then they'll sell it on eBay as a 64 gig for a lot more money. So this tool is used by a lot of people to check those things out. And yeah, it obviously gives you the tools to do that. So the URL down here, it goes to the same site usually where they host up the firmware tools in order to download and reprogram the firmware. Here is the PowerShell script. You can find it on my GitHub gist page. It's a really stupidly simple PowerShell. It's got about 3 lines of function, but another like 20 or 30 lines of making things pretty. You guys know how that goes. I get a list of the plug-and-play devices, PNP, right? Plug-and-play devices, that's all USB things. I get a list before you plug it in. I pause, you plug it in, give it a minute, right? It recognizes all those things. I go, once you continue, I get another list of all those plug-and-play devices. And then there's even a function in PowerShell that says, get me a differential between these 2 variables. Like I said, 3 lines of code. It's nothing amazing, but it makes this process incredibly fast. So it dumps out a quick list of the differences, and then it gives you the full properties, everything that's stored inside the plug-and-play properties. So here's an example of that output. You can see some things like the USB store up there, for those of you familiar with forensic artifacts. For every USB store, there's also a corresponding USB non-store. Okay. And then you've got the WPAD, enum thing, all that kind of stuff. So this is the quick list on the top. You can see over there it says diff list and then long list. Down here, it'll scroll for a few pages with the full long list of all the properties for each of those devices. So let me just pop through here real quick. You can see on this one, you've got just a USB and an HID. There's no USB store on there at all. So if you're plugging in a thumb drive and you don't see a USB store, but instead you see an HID. And this is just a USB. So it's just a logical, oh, right down here. So that's a USB Ethernet that's plugged in there. So now the slides for what happens when you plug in some of these devices. The USB rubber ducky in default configuration, you can program a lot of those things and change if it's got storage or if it's not or whatever else. So over there you can see there's a mass storage, there's an input, there's a keyboard, there's a disk drive, there's a volume, there's ducky storage, clue, right? And then there's a composite device. One of the other devices, the USB, the LAN turtle from Hack5, by default it gives you an ISA tap and then also a Realtek Ethernet controller. Again, thumb drive, Ethernet controller. Clue. And then this is the USB armory with the Ethernet enabled for for Mubik's attack. He ran this for me on his devices because I don't have all of those things. And then I had I think someone gave me, I didn't get that slide in here, the most put together attack using this methodology or using this mechanism is poison tap. A guy by the name of Sammy, well known in the industry here. He put together a framework that basically you run an installer and you get it installed on this device, and it will install poisoned cache in your JavaScript history for the top million Alexa sites. And so you've basically got a JavaScript rat running now in your victim's web cache anytime they start up and go to basically any site ever, right? The top million sites. So then just show and tell about some of these devices, what they look like. That's the armory and then the Phison controller. And that's all the time I have, but happy to take questions out in the hall or